Hello, the 31st here, how's it going? Welcome back to another PowerPoint presentation. Today I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the Lost Pokédex that they've been doing over on the Did You Know Gaming YouTube channel. They are some pretty damn good videos that they have put a lot of effort into, and I really think you should just go watch those if you haven't already. The links will be down below. There's 2 parts and there will be a third eventually. And I'm going to be talking about very little from those videos, mostly biology things. So seriously, do go watch those. And for a little bit of context, this Lost Dex is essentially a strategy guide that was made in 1996, only in Japan, and has some extra information that the Dex in the game wasn't able to include. And it also gives us a lot of context and ideas when it comes to the development of the games and what they wanted Pokemon to be like. And interestingly enough, it contains a lot of answers to questions that I have always wondered, as well as some of the directions they were originally planning to take Pokemon biology. And the first thing that really stood out to me was that this book, at this stage of the development of Pokemon, the Kanto in which we play in Red and Blue, was meant to be the Kanto of real-world Japan. The Pokemon world as we know it, at this stage, was never meant to exist. This is why real-world places and animals are mentioned in the Dex. Back then, the Pokemon world was just the real world, but at some stage, Pokemon had evolved, and evolved naturally through the process of natural selection, plus maybe a bit of magic. As such, animals and real places are mentioned both in this book, and as I said, in the actual Dex, and it's stated that Pokemon and animals evolved alongside each other and from one another. Specifically, it talks about the relationship between certain animal and Pokemon species, implying they have common ancestors. And speaking of species, it explains one of the biggest mysteries I've always had when it comes to Pokemon terminology, which is that every single individual Pokemon, even in the same evolutionary line, is described as being its own species. This was because when the Dex was originally written for Red and Blue, they didn't know what Pokemon evolved into what. Through the hard work of some researchers and Prof Oak, they knew that in the Kanto region, there was 150 different unique forms of Pokemon, but they didn't know what evolved from what. As a result, every single unique Pokemon was classified as its own different species, and essentially one of the goals of the trainers Red and Blue is to discover this connection between different Pokemon. What evolves from what and how? Personally, I find that's a very interesting concept when it comes to the development of the game and the Pokedex as a whole, but also it's fascinating to finally know why each individual Pokemon has its own unique species. I guess it's just a leftover remnant of the fact that they were originally described like this and they've just kept those ways of explaining these Pokemon. Another thing that stood out to me was that they mapped the intelligence of every single Pokemon from highest to lowest. The most intelligent Pokemon being able to understand and maybe even replicate human speech, all the way down to absolutely mindless creatures. They'd always had an idea of the concept of Pokemon intelligence and what levels different things would be on, and it does show that different Pokemon do have different levels of intelligence. This is a topic that came up fairly recently in a lot of discussions thanks to Calyrex and its complete sentience and consciousness, and how it contrasted with the just animal level of intelligence that a lot of other Pokemon have. Knowing that they originally planned to map the intelligence of all the Pokemon shows they had big plans for the franchise, and I sort of wonder where that went. Another aspect of Pokemon biology and the Pokemon world they mapped out was the food sources every single Pokemon uses. These were used in the design process for a lot of Pokemon, and again shows a fascinating glimpse into the design process, but also a bit of Pokemon biology. It's confirmation that the phenotype of a Pokemon is based on its food sources, much the same way as it is in real life. And that also showed a bunch of, food web stuff that I'm not going to go into now. Another thing that really stood out to me was the way they talked about the seas. So basically when they were designing the Pokemon and the world, they had the idea that the Pokemon that lived in the seas would be less intelligent and less evolved than those that lived on land, because the sea was essentially a more constant environment and therefore led to less evolution because there was less changes and therefore less adaptation to those changes. I'm interested to go look and see if they've carried on this concept throughout the years or whether that's something that just got thrown to the wayside after the development of Red and Blue. There are definitely changes in the modern era. For example, climate change is mentioned in the Pokemon games, especially stuff like coral bleaching, things like that. They're coming into play, so it might be interesting to have a look and see how this design and concept is reflected in modern day Pokemon. The next bit of Pokemon biology, or concept for Pokemon biology they had, was to do with breeding and gender, some favourite topics of mine on the channel. Now, obviously in Generation 1, breeding was not a mechanic, but it's clear that it had always been planned. And they go into these plans in some interesting detail that has clearly shown the development and how the process has changed. When they talk about the reproduction of Pokemon in this dex, they talk about things like breeding seasons, spawning, and Pokemon laying thousands of eggs at a time. Basically, at this stage of the development of the Pokemon franchise, Pokemon were just going to breed the same way that their animal counterparts did. This would obviously lead to a great diversity in the different ways Pokemon would breed, and also the results of said breeding, whether it be one egg, loads of eggs, live birth, whether it required specific environments or seasons. These things were originally going to play a huge part. However, there was clearly some limitation when it came to actually putting this into the game. Whether that be the technology of the time couldn't accommodate it, or simply because game mechanics would be very complicated if that was the case. But by Generation 2, this idea was scrapped, and now we have the system where Pokemon breed in egg groups and lay one egg at a time, and just whenever they want. Still, it's interesting to see what direction it could have gone and how it was originally planned. As for gender, they make it very clear that Pokemon were male and female because of their reproductive organs. In this way, Starmie and Staryu were hermaphroditic, but because they weren't just male or female, they didn't know how to classify them, and as such were gender unknown. Personally, I believe they've still kept this up, and that Pokemon are male and female because of their biological gender, although not everyone agrees with me for some reason. And the final element of Pokemon biology mentioned in this Lost Dex that really caught my attention was related to the biology of type. The Dex mentions that when they examined Magikarp, they found that it had dragon cells. And what this means to me is that there are specific cellular differences between the different types of Pokemon. But of course, Gyarados isn't a dragon type, nor has it ever been a dragon type. So what I get from this concept is that to use dragon-type moves, you would need dragon-type cells. This was obviously a concept that was completely abandoned. Stuff like the specifics of Pokemon cellular biology, they are never going to get into. It's a whole world that they would have to try and explain, and they like to keep things on a very surface level. They're not going to talk about the specifics of Pokemon biology, and I can understand why. That would be a lot of effort to go through. But the mere mention of dragon cells really piqued my interest, and I do want to know what this was originally meant to be and how this was going to work. What plan did they have for the cells of Pokemon? And what do dragon cells really mean? But I've probably talked on for far too long about this. Like I said, those videos are amazing work they've done, and you have to go watch them. Their links will be down below. It is really interesting, and I cannot wait for the third part. But obviously, this dex is far from main canon nowadays. A lot of the things mentioned are retconned, right? Like I said, this was original Pokemon back when it was in the human world, not its own world. They talk about Pokemon only being 2 million years old, even though within the same game, I'm pretty sure they have dex entries about hundreds of millions of years ago when Pokemon lived. But it is fascinating to see the original process and how it's bled through in many of the different aspects of Pokemon nowadays. How these original ideas shaped the franchise we love. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please do all the things, and goodbye.